Mark, weighing 325 pounds, and Sarah, having lost friends to heart attacks, faced concerns about Mark's health. In short, she limited their lovemaking encounters to 4 times a year, tied to weight loss goals. These occasions included Valentine's Day, their anniversary, and both birthdays. Over 2 years, Mark shed a substantial amount of weight, reaching around 207 pounds, but contemplated quitting after losing 118 pounds. After all, the journey had been arduous. When Mark expressed his desire to quit, Sarah adamantly refused. This is when she issued the threat that serves as the inspiration for this story. If Mark quit, he would only receive closeness 4 times a year, prompting Sarah to seek fulfillment elsewhere due to her lovemaking needs. In the moments following Sarah's threat, the foundation of their marriage trembled. It began when Mark's head snapped up, and he looked at her with shock and confusion. The foundation cracked as she witnessed sadness and hurt in his eyes, a result of her words. The marriage's foundation crumbled as his emotions shifted from sadness to anger and disgust. Sarah realized immediately that she had made a critical mistake. Sarah had pushed her beloved man to his limits to fulfill her desires for weight loss, then threatened infidelity as punishment. She questioned her own actions, realizing the impact on Mark. Mark expressed frustration, emphasizing the tremendous effort he put into losing over 100 pounds for Sarah's sake. He accused her of using closeness as a tool to manipulate him, expressing disappointment at her reward of continued deprivation and potential infidelity. Mark believed Sarah had jeopardized their marriage, introducing chaos into their home. He questioned her trustworthiness and speculated about her thoughts of infidelity throughout their 2-year journey. In conclusion, he felt Sarah had ruined their marriage, leaving him uncertain about what to believe. Sarah expressed regret, insisting that she never intended to engage in infidelity. Despite her plea, Mark, with a look of disgust, questioned the credibility of her words. He conveyed his seriousness about the situation, and a few minutes later left the kitchen table, heading into the garage to contemplate the situation. In the garage, Mark declared his need for time to think, leaving Sarah in tears as she realized the gravity of the situation. She sobbed, acknowledging the seed of doubt planted in Mark's mind, understanding the challenge of dispelling it. Reflecting on her actions, Sarah admitted her lack of consideration for Mark's feelings. She acknowledged her greed and desire for more, despite Mark's previous efforts. Now, she recognized the need to regain what she had lost. Mark, spending about an hour in the garage, engaged in activities to occupy his hands while contemplating the complexities of the situation. He didn't really think his wife had cheated on him over the last 2 years, but he wasn't sure. Earlier in the day, he would have been sure, but now, after her comment, he just couldn't be sure anymore. He didn't know either if she would have cheated on him in the future. Earlier, he would have never believed it, but now he wasn't sure anymore. He said out loud, "I need to find out." Mark walked back into the house. Sarah remained seated at the kitchen table, visibly distressed with red eyes and a red nose, a result of her recent tears. Mark observed her condition, feeling a sense of regret, yet he remained resolute in carrying out his decision. He communicated to Sarah his decision to abandon the diet, informing her that he would restrict their carnal moments to the previously agreed upon 4 times a year, or even none at all, leaving the choice to her discretion. Mark warned of severe consequences if she chose to engage in relations with someone else, expressing his intent to inflict physical damage on her potential lover. Mark sternly addressed Sarah, asserting that any infidelity on her part would lead to an immediate end of their relationship. He emphasized that he would not tolerate staying married to a cheater and labeled her as a fancy woman, indicating his lack of tolerance for unfaithfulness. He declared his mistrust and announced his intention to closely monitor her actions, cautioning her to be exceedingly careful. Concluding his message, Mark mentioned his departure for a while, indicating his absence for lunch, but assuring his presence for dinner. He offered the option of ordering food if she didn't feel like cooking, leaving the atmosphere charged with tension and uncertainty. Mark grabbed his car keys off the counter and walked out the back door into the garage. Moments later, Sarah heard the garage door open, and she heard Mark's car drive away. Sarah said out loud, "Oh my God, I can't believe this. How could I be so stupid?" She began sobbing again and just sat there, wishing she had kept her mouth shut. An hour or so later, she got up to go to the bathroom, then went and lay on her bed and cried some more. When Mark arrived home later that afternoon, he found her in the exact same position. Like so many husbands who suspected his wife of cheating, Mark decided to do some detective work on his own. He thought the easiest way to start was to drive to the telephone providers and request a printout of call logs on their home phone and on his wife's cell phone. Both were in his name, so he knew he would not be having any trouble getting the reports. The landline phone company told him he could have it electronically, and they were able to upload the call logs for the last 3 years onto a CD for him for a small fee. He gladly paid it and walked out of the office with everything he asked for. Yes, he requested 3 years because he wanted to be able to go back before he had started the diet to see if there had been any motivation for Sarah cutting him off in the first place. Next, he went to the cell phone company and requested identical data. They hesitated at first, since it was his wife's cell phone number he wanted the data for, but Mark pointed out that indeed it was a joint account with his name prominently on the records, so they had no reason to withhold any information he might request. They offered the data electronically as well, for a fee of $20. Mark thought it excessive, but probably worth the money, so he could more easily access the information. He did make a note, though, that perhaps he would rethink his cell phone provider in the future. Arriving at home around 4 p.m., Mark saw Sarah laying on their bed, sound asleep. He decided to let her sleep and went back to their home office, locking the office door so he would not be interrupted. He sat down at the computer and downloaded all of the data from the 2 CDs into a folder in his documents file. He had already formulated how he would conduct his search. He was going to start with 2 years ago and compile a list of every telephone number called in that first month when he started his diet and when Sarah had restricted his closeness to 4 times a year, plus rewards for goals achieved. That would have been September of 2008 on their home phone. September had 96 calls to 19 different numbers. He found that using the format the phone company had provided for him, he could sort the data in a number of different ways. So he created a list by numbers, showing the number, the date, the time, and the duration of the call. Once he got the system figured out, it took him about an hour and a half to create that list for every call made from their home phone in the last 2 years. He was just about ready to start the same process on Sarah's cell phone data when he heard the office door knob rattle. The door was locked, so no one could come in, so he saved everything he had been doing and stashed away all evidence of what he had been doing. He logged off the computer and went and opened the door to find the most pitiful sight he could imagine. There stood Sarah in a seriously disheveled state, hair a mess, eyes and nose red from crying and sniffling. Every once in a while she had her head bent down and only reluctantly looked up and into Mark's eyes. She expressed deep remorse to Mark, acknowledging the hurt and anger she caused. Sarah recognized her own selfish and cruel actions, admitting that she overstepped by interfering with his diet progress. She apologized sincerely, asking for forgiveness and acknowledging that the decision to continue the diet should have been solely his. Despite feeling the overwhelming influence of the situation, she pleaded with Mark to forgive her. Mark conveyed his forgiveness to Sarah, emphasizing that it was granted only based on the information available to him at the moment. He expressed his love for her and reminded her of the sacrifices he made during the 2-year struggle with his weight, including abstaining from closeness, all done for her. However, he admitted that he reached a breaking point and could no longer continue. Mark addressed the current situation, describing it as a gorilla in the room that needed to be addressed. He stressed the importance of knowing definitively whether or not she had cheated on him, as the uncertainty would drive him crazy. Mark outlined the conditions for their relationship moving forward, stating that if she had not cheated in the past and did not plan to in the future, they could be okay. However, he made it clear that he needed assurance. He held Sarah accountable for creating the mess with her hasty comment and threat, expressing his disbelief at her lack of consideration for his feelings and the damage it caused to his trust in her. Mark highlighted the need for her to deal with the consequences until he felt confident in their relationship. Sarah was hoping Mark would just forgive her and forget what she had said, but that was not to be. She thought, I suppose I deserved everything that was happening to me, but I hoped it could all go away." She nodded her head slowly and resigned agreement and turned and walked dejectedly back to the bedroom and closed the door behind her. She lay on her bed again, not sobbing, but with tears streaking her face. Mark opened the bedroom door and asked, "Sarah, do you want something to eat?" Sarah said, "No, Mark, I am not hungry." Mark walked out to his car and drove off again to a place nearby called Grisham's. He and Sarah had gone there for drinks many times, and their food was excellent. He knew he could have a few beers and a greasy but delicious bacon cheeseburger. In the 2 years previous, he had not had more than 2 beers in a week's time and not 1 bacon cheeseburger. Tonight, he was going to give in and have what he wanted. He knew that he would never allow himself to get overweight like he had been before. But tonight, he was going to splurge and enjoy his dinner, even though his heart was breaking. When he got home, he went back to the office and began working on the call log from Sarah's cell phone. Because he already knew the drill, it was easier to finish the cell phone list, and he was done in half the time. After reviewing the 2 lists, Mark determined that over the course of 2 years, they had 3,482 calls made in total from a total of 45 different telephone numbers. He decided to sort the calls by telephone number and had some surprising results. There were almost 300 calls to his cell phone, about 200 calls to his parents' number, and a similar number of calls to Sarah's parents' number. There were close to that many to each of Sarah's sisters, and about half that number to his brother John. In addition, there was a scattering of calls to various friends whom Mark recognized the numbers, and a few to other numbers he didn't recognize. Going down the list, though, he discovered that there were over 200 calls to a number he didn't recognize, and another 50-plus calls to a second number he didn't recognize. Then he realized there were some calls, 30 or more, to additional numbers that were made over the course of 2 years. He assumed those might be hair salons, stores, church, etc. None of those statistics bothered Mark much, so he just noted them and went back to the 2 major unrecognizable numbers. Being the type of guy Mark was, he decided to refine his research a little more and sorted the calls by day and time. For those 2 numbers, the surprising results gave him the chills, and almost immediately, he was burning up with suspicion and anger. Every Wednesday at 11 a.m., Mark attended a staff meeting with his boss and other department heads at a local restaurant with meeting rooms. They convened in conference for an hour, took a 1-hour lunch break, and concluded their business by 2:30 p.m. or 3 p.m. consistently. Every week, at 10:55 a.m., without fail, there was a call to him on his cell phone. Yes, some weeks were missed, but Mark instantly recognized those were the weeks he was on vacation. But the rule remained. Every Wednesday at 10:55 a.m., at 11:05 a.m. every Wednesday, a call was made to the first of the 2 numbers Mark didn't recognize. He was burning up now. It seemed too much of a coincidence not to be suspicious. Mark knew at that moment that what he was going to discover would not bring him joy. Persevering, he looked at the second number and quickly realized that these calls were consistently placed on Fridays. On Friday afternoons once a month, Mark played golf with his brother and their best friends, finishing the 18 holes around 5:30 p.m. They would stop in the clubhouse for a couple of drinks before heading home, usually reaching home before 6:30 p.m. On those Fridays, he would shower and take Sarah out to eat. What angered him was that Sarah always called him just before he teed off to express her love and let him know she would be waiting when he finished his round and got home. Mark now understood what was going on, but he lacked visual proof or knowledge of the person with whom she was cheating. The scary part was wondering how long it had been going on, and if it started only when Sarah cut him off, or if it began earlier. So, he extended his investigation another year and discovered that the same calls were made once a month for the 3 months before he was cut off. Whatever Sarah was doing, she had been doing it 3 months earlier, but not as frequently. All he had to do now was figure out who and then decide what he was going to do about it. Mark thought finding out who would be easy. He ran a reverse lookup on the first number and found it to be a cell phone number not listed. He ran the reverse lookup on the second number and discovered it was listed to a Tony Batali. Of course, Mark knew exactly who Tony Batali was. He was Mark's trainer at the gym. Sarah had initially found him for Mark, so Sarah was calling Tony on the Fridays when Mark golfed, Mark thought. He noted the address in his call log spreadsheet and decided to go out again for a while. Upon returning to Grisham's, Mark had a couple more beers. When things quieted down after the dinner rush, he approached the rather attractive bartender Brenda, seeking help. He briefly explained the situation and requested Brenda to determine if the first number belonged to Tony. He dialed the number and instructed Brenda to ask for Tony and, if it was him, to mention that a woman had given her the number as a potential trainer. If it was Tony, she should tell him that if he had openings, she would stop by the gym one of these days. Brenda, after taking the phone,